Yes, Juan Soto is still a New York Met, but the Mets made another signing over the weekend. We get into Clay Holmes joining the Mets rotation and what's next after Juan Soto has signed with the New York Mets. Welcome in to another edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. A double dose here for you. You got the early morning reaction to Juan Soto signing with the New York Mets. Now we can take a couple hours, we can breathe, we can relax a little bit, and now we can get into the other move that the Mets made over the weekend, and we can discuss what is next. So Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie here with you, another edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. Jack, it is still real. Juan Soto is still a New York Met, but we have other fish to fry here on today's program.
Yeah, you said we have time to breathe, have time to process. I still am in utter shock that Juan Soto is going to play for the Mets for the next 15 years potentially. But excited to talk about Clay Holmes, excited to talk about what the rest of the 2025 Mets roster could look like. So I'm ready when you are. Let's get into this thing.
I'm excited to tell everybody about BetOnline. Continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen with the largest selection of odds on everything from football to NBA, college basketball, NHL to UFC. Head to BetOnline today and don't forget to use our promo code Bleav, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Speaking of starting, Clay Holmes is the newest starter for the New York Mets rotation. The Mets signed him to a 3-year, $38 million deal. There's a lot of numbers that's been thrown at me over the weekend. 15 years, $765 million, $75 million signing bonus, $51 million AAV. A lot of numbers over the weekend. I believe that they signed him to a 3-year, $38 million contract to join their rotation. So the New York Mets doing something that we championed for on this podcast. A lot of people have been championing for in baseball circles. Hey, there are some of these relievers that have some pretty decent arsenals that you could probably make like 5 or 6 inning starters. Jeff Hoffman's a name that's been thrown out there. Clay Holmes has also been discussed in that mold. The Mets identified Clay Holmes as the guy that they thought was best suited for that, and they signed him to a 3-year, $38 million deal. Has an opt-out after the second season, and Clay Holmes will join Frankie Montas as the 2 new additions to this rotation. Jack, where would you like to start as Clay Holmes joins the Mets 2025 rotation?
I guess we could just start by the value of the contract, I guess. 3 years, $38 million. It's roughly, $13 million a year. And like you said, this is a experiment, essentially, to move Clay Holmes back to the starting rotation. He has 4 career starts. But they were all when he was a rookie back in 2018 with the Pittsburgh Pirates. So this is a big transition. I think when you look at the value of the contract, it kind of reflects more onto it really reflects how much of an experiment this kind of is. Like, they gave $17 million a year to Frankie Montas, and now this is either going to be a contract that ages as a really good deal for a rotation piece or a pretty decent deal for the setup man in the Mets bullpen at, $13 million a year. So I think the value of the contract itself really reflects kind of what the Mets see in Holmes and what they hope to accomplish with the pitching development side of things in the major league level that, since over the last year, they've really become known for and become, something of a success story.
I also, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Mets hired somebody from the Yankees pitching staff, their coaching staff, to oversee their pitching development overall, right? I believe that was something that they did this offseason, and if there's anybody who knows Clay Holmes and Clay Holmes' makeup, it would be somebody who worked over there on that staff and worked in that organization with pitching and pitching development. And so you would think that there was some influence there in making this decision and being able to check in and be like, hey, do you think that Clay Holmes can do this? And yeah, assistant pitching coach Desi Druschel from the New York Yankees was signed by the New York Mets. I knew they took somebody from over there, but they brought him over to join their pitching staff. And so they certainly probably tapped into that resource when making this decision. I mean this with all the respect in the world. You can take David Stearns out of the small market. You can't take the small market out of David Stearns. This is a small market-esque move, right? This is something that these frontline thinking, need to do things differently, need to be creative organizations do, right? The Rays, the Astros, the Brewers, like these teams do this type of stuff. And so you can combine, and I think this weekend is the perfect example of David Stearns got his small market wish. We're going to make Clay Holmes a starter. And then there's also the big market. We're going to spend $765 million on Juan Soto. And that all happened in about a 36-hour span. So
yeah.
credit to the Mets for running the gambit of making the cool small market moves, but also making the very cool big splashy moves. Look, I, in the perfect offseason, championed Jeff Hoffman for this role. So I can't necessarily be that upset that the Mets went this direction when it is a direction that I wanted them to go. I would have preferred Hoffman over Holmes. There's a longer runway of Hoffman attempting to be a starter than there is with Clay Holmes and the 4 starts that he's made. Yeah. But I am not going to get on the New York Mets for thinking that they can turn Clay Holmes into a starter, because if it doesn't work, they then put him back into the bullpen, and he's a $13 million reliever for the back end of their bullpen, and he's a better version of Adam Ottavino. Like, I'd be pretty happy with Clay Holmes being my 7th or 8th inning guy down the stretch, setting it up for Edwin Diaz if this experiment fails. Here's why I don't think it is going to fail, because if you want to be successful as a starter, you have to have a bunch of different things, right? You got to have a fastball. You have to have a fastball that plays in some capacity. You also need to have out pitches. You also need to be able to throw some of those out pitches to both sides of the plate, lefties and righties. That's what's going to allow you to turn over a lineup, and that's what's going to allow you to go deeper into games. Well, Clay Holmes, this is going to shock you, everybody. He throws a sinker, and he throws a sweeper. Shocking, I tell you.
What?
That a Mets pitcher acquisition throws a sinker and a sweeper. But in credit to Fangraphs, they wrote a great story about the Mets being creative with Clay Holmes, and so this chart is from their story. But these are the run values per 100 for Clay Holmes' pitches broken down by platoon. His sinker versus lefty, negative 0.3. His sinker versus righty, 0.6. His slider versus lefty, 1.4. His slider versus righty is 2.3. There's your perfect example. The slider plays to both sides of the plate. His sweeper versus lefties, minus 1.2. Yes, you don't necessarily want to throw a sweeper to the opposite-handed pitcher. It is a bit of a problem. But his sweeper versus righty, 0.7. Overall versus lefties, his run value per 100 on all of his pitches, negative 0.4. Versus righties, 0.7. So he is basically around the same. His stuff plays to both sides of the plate to a varying degree. His whiff percentage for these pitches is pretty similar across the board. The hard hit percentage is pretty similar across the board, especially the sinker. It plays to both sides of the plate. That is a good thing. So when you're looking under the hood and you're looking to try to see if this is going to work, you look at these pitches to see how are they going to play to both sides. The slider absolutely plays to both sides. It's kind of a gyro slider. It's not necessarily that long looping sweeper that he also throws, and that sinker, it plays to both sides of the plate. I think he needs a traditional fastball, and I think he needs to add another pitch. He threw a changeup in the past, and I wonder if that's the thing they try to reincorporate into his arsenal, and he tries to throw that as another kind of just show me pitch to add to the arsenal. But I think I can get behind this. I think the under-the-hood numbers tell me that the New York Mets saw what we saw as a unique opportunity to go get one of these relievers, transition them into a starter. Now, look, this is going to come down to if he can get the traditional fastball working as a pitch for him, and he can add that other pitch, because he's got the sinker, he's got the slider, he has the sweeper. He needs to add something else that I think he can throw to lefties, and that changeup, I think, would be the pitch.
Yeah, I think the changeup's an interesting one. I want to point out also that during the playoffs this past October, he brought back his four-seam fastball, which was something that he relied on in the past and really kind of didn't use at all throughout the regular season. So bringing back the four-seam is interesting. It's like a slightly different pitch shape than your sinker. I also want to point out that another under the hood numbers thing that I think will help contribute to the idea that this is something that can work, that is viable, is Clay Holmes averaged 96.6 miles an hour on his fastballs in the 2024 regular season. That's 88th percentile. When you talk about a reliever making a transition to the rotation, fastball velocity is kind of an underrated part of that, because it's a lot easier to throw really hard when you're only throwing like an inning at a time, or like an inning and a third maybe, or less than an inning. It becomes harder to put in that much effort consistently over 4 innings, 5 innings, 6, 7. And as a result of that, oftentimes when a pitcher makes a transition either way from the rotation to the bullpen, their fastball velo generally jumps up because they're able to put in more effort into those pitches on a pitch-by-pitch basis. But the opposite is true for relievers making the switch into the rotation. They're going to have to take some effort off of those pitches because they want to, maintain their stamina. But the fact that Clay Holmes already is starting with a average fastball velocity above 96.5 miles an hour gives you a sense that even in a rotation role, he is going to be able to throw a speedy fastball that will still play. And when I was looking at Clay Holmes, I was thinking about other recent examples of relievers who have made successful transitions to the rotation, and obviously the main one we can point to is Garrett Crochet. So I looked into the numbers. I looked at what Garrett Crochet's numbers look like in his last year when he was healthy, full-time as a reliever in 2022, and a lot of the numbers on his StatCast page, percentile-wise, looked very similar. Very, very high percentiles in fastball velocity, like I was mentioning, expected ERA, expected batting average. Whiff percentage was high for both. Barrel percentage was great. K percentage was great. And notably, Clay Holmes has a better hard hit percentage number than Garrett Crochet did in his last year in the bullpen, and ranked 100th percentile, the best in baseball in ground ball percentage. So I think, like you said, the Clay Holmes move to the rotation is going to have to come with one or two more pitches to the repertoire, but a lot of the behind the scenes, under the hood numbers really back up that this could be another Mets pitching development success story, much like Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, even Jose Quintana last year.
I'll add another example that I think is really important that will further emphasize why this might work for the New York Mets. Is the other example that people will draw to is Jordan Hicks. And Jordan Hicks signed that 4-year deal with the Giants. They took him from reliever in St. Louis to, hey, we're going to make you a starter. Here's the problem with that, though. Jordan Hicks' fastball velo the year before he joined the Giants was, this is not a typo, 100th percentile fastball velo. 100.1 was his fastball velo. It is really difficult when you are a blow-em-away reliever. I'm just going to throw gas and just blow it by you because I have 83rd percentile K percentage. I have an above-average whiff percentage. It's hard to dial that back, and now I'm not a blow-it-by-you pitcher. I got to rely on the ground ball. I got to rely on the ball going in play. That can be difficult because that was his fastball velo percentile in 2023. Do you want to know what it was this year? 59th percentile. His fastball velo dropped all the way to 94.6. So it's hard to take a flamethrower and put him in this position. Nobody is going to confuse Clay Holmes with a flamethrower. Here's the other thing that's really important. Clay Holmes, ground ball pitcher. 100th percentile ground ball percentage last year in Major League Baseball among pitchers. 64.6% of the time, ground balls. That's what he pitches to. So the Mets are going to build a great defense behind Clay Holmes. I guarantee you the Clay Holmes starts are going to be the starts where Mark Vientos isn't playing third base and Tyrone Taylor or Jose Siri is in center field, and that might be the day they get Juan Soto off his feet and they make him the DH to change up the defense. Like, that's where Carlos Mendoza is going to deploy a defensive constructed lineup because you got Clay Holmes starting. You want the ball to be on the ground. That's what he's good at, and so that's why I think this can work, because you're going to ask him, hey, instead of throwing it 96, maybe let's dump it back to 95, 94. We're still going to throw the sink. We're going to throw the changeup. We're still going to throw all that other stuff, and we're going to allow you to keep the ball on the ground. That's a much easier place to be than, hey, you throw 100. I need you to dial it back to 95 to be able to get through 5 innings. I think with Clay Holmes, you're going to ask him to take a little bit off of his stuff, not the massive jump that Jordan Hicks had to go through. Now, there is a chance that this doesn't work, and this is what I would caution here. David Stearns earns the benefit of the doubt here. We said this with the Frankie Montas situation. But so far, the Mets have added Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes to their rotation. One is a starter who didn't have a good year last year, is not coming off of the most, star-studded, stat-filled year a year ago. And the other guy is a reliever, former closer that you want to turn into a starter. This isn't a beacon of consistency and a beacon of success that the Mets are injecting into their rotation. So the one thing that I would say is you got to get somebody reliable. Whether that's Sean Manaea, whether that is Roki Sasaki, whether that is trading for Garrett Crochet or trading for Luis Castillo or trading for Zach Allen or any of the trade names that we can bring up here, that still needs to be a piece of this puzzle. So, Jack, I think we use that as the perfect segue to discuss what's next for the New York Mets. Juan Soto's in the building. Clay Holmes is in the building. Frankie Montas is in the building. These signings are underway. They have already allocated a lot of money. What is next as the MLB winter meetings get underway today as we are recording this podcast? What is next up on the to-do list for David Stearns and the New York Mets?
So I laid out a few of my biggest glaring holes for the 2025 Mets roster after however long it's been, about a month I guess, in almost a half since the 2024 season ended. I think number one is the starting pitching, because you just brought it up. This is a starting rotation that, as of right now, is Kodai Senga as the ace, David Peterson as the number two, which already is a little bit shaky, and then Frankie Montas, Clay Holmes, and maybe Paul Blackburn, Tyler McGill. You name a minor leaguer to fill, a further depth spot. But getting a starting pitcher who, like you said, has established success in a rotation spot is going to be an important thing for the Mets, especially given that Kodai Senga is coming off of a season in which he threw in one game during the regular season. Yes.
We always have that brave start.
We always have that brave start. But that being said, that the lack of innings from Senga and the shakiness of guys like Montas and Holmes suggests that you need not just innings eaters, but reliable guys that will be able to pitch well and pitch well down the stretch, because as we learned last year, that was a big reason for the Mets' lack of success in the postseason. A lot of these guys just ran out of gas. And right now, looking at the rotation, Frankie Montas, I don't think threw a ton of innings last year.
150.
Clay Holmes, a reliever.
63.
So obviously didn't throw a lot of innings last year. Kodai Senga threw, I think, 6 1/3 because of his injury. David Peterson even had an abridged season because of
121.
Beginning of the season. Paul Blackburn,
70-something.
Like, the Mets need someone who has proven that they can pitch well deep into games, but also deep into the season, because right now that is the most glaring issue that I am seeing on this roster.
The New York Mets, as we currently sit here, and this is why we had the fun show that we had last night, and we had fun because Juan Soto is going to be a New York Met potentially for the rest of his career, and if he goes into Cooperstown, there's a decent chance that it's going to be with a Mets hat on, all that fun stuff. That's why we had that show yesterday, right? We had all that fun. Now this is okay, we need to get serious. We need to finish the job. Because Juan Soto is great. It changes the story, but now you got to do something with it. You have to now finish the job. And right now, as it currently sits, I don't think the New York Mets have a starter on their current opening day roster that I can pencil in for 180 innings. Kodai Senga threw 166 innings his first year here. He's projected to throw 169, according to the Fangraphs projections. Frankie Montas threw 150 innings last year. I will very quickly look at what Fangraphs has him projected for, 155 next season. Clay Holmes, you'd be lucky if you get 130 out of him next season. That's doubling his workload from last year. So that's why six-man rotation is going to be really important. David Peterson, 121 innings last season. He's projected to throw 147. 121 from last year is his career high. The New York Mets don't have that reliable, go out there, give me 175, 180 innings. Now, maybe Kodai Senga can be that guy if he's fully healthy. But you're coming off a year where it was not good for Kodai Senga on the health front. Now, he was able to come back and finish the year, and that was good. It was a good thing for him to come back in the postseason and pitch those innings. It wasn't great results-wise, but I think that set a building block for next season. The Mets need another starter. I think the Mets need 2 more starters. And so for me, there's a lot of people out there that want them to go after Pete Alonso, that want them to re-sign Pete. I'm more in the Christian Walker camp than I am in the Pete Alonso camp, but if Pete comes back, I'm not going to be upset about it. To me, this priority right now, what needs to be spot 1 on the to-do list, you need to call Seattle and see what they want for one of their pitchers. You need to call Arizona and see if they're interested in moving Zach Allen. You need to truly find out what the White Sox want for Garrett Crochet. You need to be asking, hey, Walker Buehler, what do you want in free agency? That is where the priority needs to be, because this team needs 2 starters. Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor and Mark Vientos and Brandon Nimmo. That top 4 of the lineup gives you a chance. You want to win the division? Because I think you sign Juan Soto, that's what the expectations are going to be from the outside. You should be competing for the NL East. This team, I think, needs 2 more starters in order to do that. Now, the beautiful thing about this podcast and the beautiful thing about the place that we're in right now is I expect them to do that. I expect them to sign guys. I don't expect us to walk into opening day, Senga, Peterson, Montas, Holmes, Paul Blackburn to be the opening day rotation. There's time. But to me, priority needs to be on starting pitching while also keeping tabs on Pete. I think Pete's market might be more slower developing than some of the other big names that are out there. And maybe, and this is where David Stearns can strike, maybe Max Fried and Corbin Burns aren't getting the contracts that they necessarily want. I don't I think the pitching market is showing us that it's going to be higher, but maybe teams balk at that price. And so maybe those prices kind of suppress a little bit. And then maybe Steve Cohen and David Stearns look at each other and say, all right, let's make a play for Max Fried. Let's make a play for Corbin Burns. I don't think that's the way they're operating right now, because I don't think they want to give out more than a 3 or 4 year deal to a pitcher. And I think that's what Burns and Fried are going to ask for. But Blake Snell signed a 1 year deal basically as the season started. Jordan Montgomery signed a deal in the spring. So it's possible that we get to January and February, and then all of a sudden the market for some of these guys isn't what they originally thought it was, and the Mets can strike just like they did with J.D. Martinez late in spring last year to fill their DH spot. So for me, priority number one, you need 2 more starters. And then I think after that we can discuss, hey, you need DH every day, or third baseman if you want to make Mark Vientos your DH. You need a first baseman, and you need some relievers. But that's the order for me right now for the New York Mets.
I am pretty much the exact same. I'm with you. Starting pitching is so valuable, particularly having depth. I mean, we just saw what the 2024 Dodgers did with literally 3 healthy starting pitchers left. They won the World Series. And like I just said, I don't think the Mets have that kind of depth yet. There are several, possible names in free agency. You mentioned the Corbin Burns and Max Fried. Also guys like, I know you don't love all of them, but Nathan Eovaldi, Jack Flaherty, Walker Buehler, and Sean Manaea, I think, are at the top of my wish list, just given what I think they'll cost relative to the rest of the starting pitching market and what I believe the Mets will be able to do with them. But like Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander are out there. I would not advocate for them coming back to the Mets. I don't think that would happen. But starting pitching is clearly a priority. And then I have DH, first base, and third base, depending on what you end up doing with Pete, with Christian Walker, with Mark Vientos. And then even aside from the bullpen, I think some more depth on the bench would really behoove the Mets, because they don't really have a ton outside of their starting lineup, particularly in the outfield. Honestly, in the infield too. They have Tyrone Taylor right now as a 4th outfielder, and then I guess Luis Angel Acuna as another infielder. They have Luis Torrens as your backup catcher. And then it's just, I literally have question marks here, because I don't know who they're going to have as another backup option in the infield. I don't know if Ronnie Mauricio is going to be healthy. I don't know if Brett Beatty is going to be on the roster, if he's going to be starting at third base, which is kind of what is projected given the lack of a first baseman for the Mets right now. So a lot of questions, a lot of opportunity to build depth for the rest of this offseason. I think the Juan Soto signing was a great start, but as I said at the end of that reaction episode that we did earlier today, job's not finished with this offseason, and David Stearns and Steve Cohen know that for sure.
Excellent use of the word behoove. I thought that was a very good job by you. So excellent word choice and usage there. Here's my prediction, and I think this is where we'll leave this episode. We wanted to stick to our regularly scheduled programming and give you a Monday episode in addition to the emergency show that we recorded late into the evening. My family not necessarily happy with me at 11 o'clock at night recording an episode screaming about Juan Soto being a New York Met, but they understood when we woke up in the morning and I explained the situation to them. But here's my prediction for this team moving forward. I think when it comes to starting pitchers, there are at least 2 more names coming in. And it is going to be one from the group of Sean Manaea, Walker Buehler, Nick Pivetta, the names that you've heard floated around the New York Mets. I think it's one from that group, and it's going to be a trade. And it might not be Garrett Crochet, but I think they're going to trade for potentially Luis Castillo. I think Zach Gallen's on the table. I think they are absolutely going to be in play on the trade market now to get a starter in the building. So my prediction is 1 free agent starter and 1 starter via a trade. And I think both of those guys are going to have higher floors and higher ceilings than Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes provide. And then I think we get to a place where the Frankie Montas, Clay Holmes part of the rotation is your number 4, number 5. Yeah. Or 5 and 6 in the 6-man rotation world that I think we're going to live in. Like, that's the way I think this ultimately pans out. So they can do 2 things at once. They can walk and chew gum. They can be paying attention to the hitter's market while also working the phones with the pitchers and everybody that's available. But I do think main priority number 1 is you got Juan Soto. I know your first 2 moves were Montas and Holmes, but I don't think you're done there yet. I think that is where the priority is, because I just don't think Pete signs in an expedited fashion unless Christian Walker immediately comes off the board. Then I think Pete's market is going to sap up pretty quickly, and he's going to have to pick a spot, and then that means I think he kind of goes back to the Mets. But I think both those guys are going to kind of wait each other out, and so with that, I think we get to a place where the Mets can focus on pitching and they can focus on the other areas of need for this team. DH, relievers, starters, whatever the case may be. We wanted to stay on time. We wanted to keep, stick to our regularly scheduled Monday, Wednesday weekend release date. So Monday edition for you here. Clay Holmes joining the rotation. Our thoughts about that, and then what is next for this team after signing Juan Soto to a 15-year, $765 million contract last night to join the New York Mets. We are in full-blown refresh mode, I think. With Soto off the board, I think you can keep social media open at the office. You can keep the MLB network on your TV if you have one in your office like I do, because I think these moves are coming fast and furious, and I would not be surprised if the New York Mets are still involved over the next couple of days. But that is going to do it for us here on this edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. Jack, where can everybody follow you on social media?
Yeah, please feel free to follow me at JF McKessie. That's both on X and on Bluesky. JF McKessie, MCKESSY. And if you are a fan of video podcast formats, you can also subscribe to me on YouTube. It's also just Jack McKessie, and that's where I have been uploading all of our episodes for Bleav in Mets. So if you want to see our ugly mugs while we're talking about the Mets, please feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube.
Yeah, and we're hoping to get out some short-form content on YouTube Shorts and TikTok here in the near future, just some maybe instant reactions to other things outside of maybe the New York Mets, and we will hope to get that stuff to you here in the short term, maybe this week, potentially on the docket for that. But you can follow me on Twitter at Chris Schubert _ on Bluesky. I am CR Schub. That's CRSCHUBE.bsky.social. You can follow me over there as well. I'm kind of splitting my time with the two sites, sharing thoughts on both. We're posting the pods on both for sure. I put the same tweet on both. But sometimes if Bluesky is the app I have open, the baseball thoughts go there. Sometimes they go on Twitter. So make sure you're on both of them so that you have an opportunity to catch all of our thoughts, because I don't just share thoughts on the Mets, baseball in general, other sports as well. So if you're interested in that, make sure you follow us on both of those pages. But that's going to do it for us here on this edition. We're back on Wednesday. Potentially some news for the New York Mets when we get back. But if not, we will have another episode for you in store here on the Bleav in Mets podcast. But that's going to do it for us here on this edition of the show. Appreciate you joining us. Please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Leave us that 5-star review. We greatly do appreciate it. And we will talk to you next time. Let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.